There was no warning, no announcement, just a shaky security camera feed posted by a faceless account on a public forum. In the grainy footage, a little girl appears from the corner of the screen. Her clothes are torn and oversized, her hair tied back in a rushed, uneven bun. She's barefoot, standing on the hot concrete of a city sidewalk. She doesn't speak. She simply walks toward a baby sitting in a wheelchair. The baby, chubby, shirtless, maybe a year old, looks up at her. She kneels down without hesitation, pulls a plastic spoon from her pocket and begins feeding him something from a paper bowl. No adult is seen, no stroller, no words exchanged. The baby doesn't resist. In fact, he opens his mouth willingly, as if this wasn't the first time. By the time Richard Monroe's assistant showed him the video, it had already reached 4 million views. The tags under the post included phrases like miracle moment, heartwarming, and guardian angel. But Richard didn't see it that way. He saw something else: neglect, failure, danger. That baby was his son, Nathan. Born with spinal muscular atrophy and confined to a specialized wheelchair, always under supervision, always with a nurse or the nanny, always, except now. Now he was in the middle of a sidewalk, fed by a homeless child with no name. Richard paused the video at the exact moment the girl looked up. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was staring at Nathan's face like she knew him. He stormed into his security team's office with his phone in hand. "Who the hell let this happen?" he shouted, slamming the device onto the desk. No one answered. The footage had no timestamp, no geolocation. The surveillance camera had been part of a private building system leaked by someone inside. The nanny's report that morning had said, routine park walk, nothing unusual. Richard reviewed her GPS logs, disconnected for an hour. That hour, the window in which his son had been left alone. He clenched his fists and took a deep breath. "Find her," he ordered. "I want to know who that girl is and where she came from. Now." The next day, local news picked it up. The video ran under titles like "Homeless Hero Feeds Disabled Child" and "The Street Angel Who Vanished." But as the media praised the unknown girl, Richard noticed something no one else did. In the background of the footage, behind a trash bin, a reflection flickered. Another figure, someone watching briefly, a pair of legs turned away just before the video cut. He magnified the image. Too blurry to identify, but something about the stance, the posture, it felt rehearsed, not accidental. Richard's instincts, sharpened by years of business deals and betrayals, flared. This wasn't a one-time moment, it was a setup. He called the police, but the case wasn't urgent enough. No crime had been committed, technically. A stranger fed a child. The nanny hadn't filed a missing persons report. There was no proof of endangerment. Richard was told to monitor the situation. That only made him angrier. He wasn't just a father. He was a billionaire used to control, used to power. But now, watching that little girl scoop food into his son's mouth with such care, he felt powerless. It stirred something old, something buried, beneath his wealth. Guilt, maybe, or something worse, recognition. He hadn't always been like this. Before the accident, before his wife's death, Richard had visited shelters, signed checks, sat with broken children, and promised support. But that was before he'd retreated into silence, burying himself in quarterly reports and boardrooms, leaving Nathan in the care of professionals. Now he was seeing the cost of that distance. His son wasn't just left alone. He had connected with someone else, a stranger, and Richard had no idea who she was. His assistant returned with a report. No local shelters recognized the girl. No recent runaways matched her description. No one had claimed to know her. She was invisible, a ghost in a yellow tank top and denim skirt. Richard watched the video again, slowing it down frame by frame. Her movements weren't random. She cradled Nathan's head. When he coughed, she wiped the side of his mouth with her shirt. She looked at him like he mattered, not with pity, with familiarity. Later that evening, Richard sat alone in Nathan's nursery. The boy was asleep, breathing lightly, curled under a blue blanket, his wheelchair parked beside the crib. The nurse had gone home. The room was quiet. Richard scrolled through the footage again on his phone, over and over, looking for answers that refused to appear. Then he noticed something else. Around the girl's neck, a chain, barely visible, and at the end of it, swinging as she leaned in, a small locket. He paused the frame, zoomed. His heart stopped. He'd seen that locket before. Years ago, during one of his wife's charity events, a baby had been presented to them. A girl, abandoned. His wife had held her for hours. She'd whispered something to Richard that night. We should keep her. She feels like home. But Richard had said no. Too complicated, too risky. They were preparing for Nathan's treatments. There was no room for more. That baby had worn a locket. His wife had left in tears that night. He hadn't thought of it again. Until now. Richard stood up, heart pounding. He called his assistant again. Get me everything on my wife's orphanage files, every child she tried to adopt, especially the ones we turned down. His voice was low, but it trembled. For the first time in years, Richard Monroe wasn't thinking about stocks or status. He was thinking about a girl with no name, and a mistake that might finally be coming back to find him. And outside, in the shadows of the same parking lot, the girl walked barefoot again, watching, waiting, holding the spoon in her hand like it meant something, like it was proof of what she didn't yet know. The photo on Richard's desk wasn't new, but it hadn't been touched in years. It showed his late wife, Olivia, holding a baby girl on her lap. The baby wore a tiny yellow dress and held a stuffed lion with one ear missing. Her eyes, wide, dark, unblinking, stared directly at the camera. Richard remembered that day. It was one of Olivia's last charity events before she fell ill. That baby had clung to her like she belonged there. Olivia had looked over at him then, silent but pleading. He had offered a weak smile, one that meant, I'm trying, but really meant, not now. Olivia had kissed the child's head and handed her back to the caretaker. That was the last time he saw her. Until now, maybe. Richard stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, the city buzzed. People moved, horns blared, but none of that reached him. His mind was in that grainy footage again. That girl, the one, feeding Nathan. Could it really be the same child from Olivia's past? She would be 7 now, maybe 8, homeless, alone, invisible to the system. It seemed impossible. But that locket, Richard had it stored in a box Olivia had left behind. He opened the safe in his study, pulled out the velvet case, and opened it. The locket was there, only it wasn't. Not quite. The one in the video had scratches, dents, like it had been worn for years. The photo inside wasn't Olivia's, it was someone else. A younger woman, maybe a caretaker. That meant it wasn't the same locket, but it also wasn't a coincidence. Richard decided to involve someone outside his corporate circle, someone who owed him a favor, but wasn't tied to the usual bureaucracy. He called Detective Emily Rourke, a former missing persons investigator who had retired early after a scandal that never quite made the papers. She picked up on the second ring. I need you to find someone, Richard said. A child, possibly from an old orphanage that no longer exists. Emily paused. And why now? She asked. Because she might have just fed my son on the street, Richard replied. Silence. Then she asked him to send the footage. Emily moved quickly. Within a day, she reported back with bad news. There were no active files on any girl matching the description. No missing persons reports, no social services contacts. It's like she never existed, Emily said. Or someone made sure she wouldn't. Richard didn't like the sound of that. He started pressing her for more. She promised to dig deeper into Olivia's volunteer history, the Foundation's archived records, even adoption attempts that were blocked or withdrawn. In the meantime, she suggested something Richard hadn't considered. What if she's not missing? What if she was thrown away on purpose? The thought made him clench his jaw. He didn't want to believe that. At night, Richard sat beside Nathan's crib again. His son reached out in his sleep, clutching at the air. Richard gently took his hand. The baby's grip was weak but present. "Do you know her?" he whispered. "Was she there before?" Of course, Nathan couldn't answer, but something inside Richard told him this wasn't just about a viral moment. It was about a mistake, one made long ago, one that hadn't been buried deep enough. He started dreaming of Olivia again. In one dream, she stood at the foot of the bed, holding the girl's hand, looking at him with eyes full of sadness. The next morning, Richard visited the Monroe Foundation's archives. He bypassed protocol, using his credentials to access files marked confidential. He found Olivia's handwritten notes, names, photos, updates on children she had tried to help. One name was circled twice: Maya, no last name, just Maya, special case, keep close. The entry was dated just weeks before Olivia's diagnosis. After that, there were no more updates. Richard scanned the notes, saw Olivia's drawings in the margins, flowers, hearts, a small stick figure holding hands with a taller one. Maya. It had to be. He printed the documents and handed them to Emily. "We have a name now," he said, "but it's not enough." Emily agreed. They'd need to track down anyone who worked at the orphanage, any records that survived its shutdown. But even as she spoke, Richard's mind wandered. He kept thinking about the girl's eyes in the video, how focused they were, how careful. Children don't act like that unless they've learned to survive on their own. He realized with growing dread that if she'd survived this long, she'd learned how to stay hidden. That made her even harder to find. Meanwhile, across the city, Maya crouched behind a dumpster near the park. She held the paper bowl in her lap, picking at the last bits of food she'd saved from that day. The spoon was gone. She had left it behind intentionally. Maybe someone would find it. Maybe it would remind the baby of her. Maybe not. But she had watched him for weeks now. She knew his schedule. She knew the nanny. She knew when he cried and what made him laugh. She didn't know why she cared, but she did. Something about him felt safe, familiar, like something lost long ago. She didn't know her last name. She didn't remember where she was born. But she remembered Olivia. She remembered a soft voice, warm arms, a scent like flowers and books. She remembered being held close and told, "I'll come back for you." But no one ever did, so she stopped waiting. Until she saw the baby, and somehow the waiting returned. She thought maybe, just maybe, he was part of that promise, part of what she had been left behind for. Emily returned with a new lead. A former staff member from the orphanage had resurfaced in a small town 2 hours away. Richard didn't wait. He chartered a car and left before dawn. As he drove through the city, he watched homeless children dart across alleys, sit by subway grates, curl under overpasses. Any of them could be Maya, but he knew her face now. He would never forget it. And he wouldn't stop until he looked her in the eyes and asked the question that haunted him every time he closed his "Are you the one we left behind?" The corner behind Jensen's Market wasn't much. Just a stretch of cracked concrete, a pair of trash bins, and a rusted fence that rattled whenever the wind picked up. But for Maya, it had been home for almost 3 weeks. She didn't sleep through the night. She couldn't. Rats scurried behind the dumpsters, and every few hours, someone passed by too slowly, too curiously. She learned early that people didn't look for her, but they might notice her if she stayed still too long. So she moved often. She rotated sleeping spots, behind the gas station near the bridge, behind the recycling bins at the car wash, and when it rained, beneath the awning of a closed-out bakery. But she always returned to Jensen's, because from there she could see the big building across the street, the one with the elevators that moved outside the glass. That was where she first saw the boy. She hadn't known his name. She still didn't. But every morning, just after the sun came up, the same woman, clean, sharp-eyed, with sunglasses and a tight bun, would wheel the baby out of the building's back entrance. The baby didn't cry. He rarely moved. He just sat in the chair, legs stiff, hands open. The woman would talk to him sometimes, pointing at birds or pulling out toys, but mostly it was silence. The boy didn't respond much, until one morning he turned his head toward Maya's hiding spot. Their eyes met, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel invisible. That first time, she didn't move. She stayed crouched, half behind the bin, barely breathing. But the next morning she shifted closer. Not enough to be seen, just enough to hear the woman humming. The tune reminded her of something from before, something soft, something warm. The woman didn't stay long, just 20 minutes or so before wheeling the boy back inside. Maya didn't understand the pattern yet, but she wanted to. She needed to. It was more than curiosity. It was instinct. She couldn't explain why she kept watching. She just did. By the fourth day, she had memorized the schedule. The woman arrived at 6:45 a.m. sharp. They stayed until 7:10, and then they disappeared into the building again. Maya noticed the boy was always clean, well-dressed and quiet. But one morning, the woman took a call. She paced a few feet away, leaving the boy unattended for almost 5 minutes. That's when Maya noticed something. The boy's head kept tilting to the right, like he was straining to see something. It took her a second to realize he was looking for her. Not the toys, not the birds, her. And that's when she began to show herself, just a little. She started wearing the same yellow tank top each day, so he could recognize her. She knew it made her more visible to others too, but she took the risk. She waved once, from a distance. The boy didn't wave back, but he smiled. That was enough. The next morning she brought a cracker she'd stolen from the bakery's trash. She held it up, broke it in two, and mimicked the motion of eating. He watched closely. The nanny didn't notice. She was on her phone again. Maya didn't approach. She didn't dare. Not yet. But then came the morning the nanny didn't show. Instead, a different woman wheeled the boy outside. She was younger, distracted, checking her phone constantly. She didn't hum. She didn't speak to him. She parked him near the sidewalk and lit a cigarette behind the trash bins, just feet from where Maya had always hidden. The smell made Maya cough, and the woman turned sharply. Maya froze. The woman stared, said nothing, then looked away. Maya expected her to report her, maybe chase her off. But she didn't. She just went back to her phone, like she hadn't seen anything. That gave Maya courage, or maybe just the illusion of it. That was the day she approached. Slowly, cautiously, holding a paper bowl she'd salvaged from a fast food bag. It had some beans in it, cold, sticky, but edible. The boy looked at her, wide-eyed, but didn't flinch. She knelt, scooped a bit with her fingers, then thought better and reached for the plastic spoon she'd kept in her pocket. She fed him. He opened his mouth gently, like he trusted her, like they knew each other. She wiped his chin with the back of her wrist. He giggled, a small sound, weak but real. It broke something inside her, something she didn't know she'd been holding shut. She stayed longer than she should have. The woman never came back around. Maya thought maybe she'd gotten lucky. Maybe this could happen again. She whispered a promise to him as she stood to leave. "I'll be back tomorrow, little one. I'll bring more." He reached out as if to hold her, but she was already gone. She didn't know a camera had recorded the entire exchange. She didn't know that video would explode across the internet by the next evening. All she knew was that for the first time in a long time, someone looked at her like she mattered. That night, she didn't sleep behind the market. She stayed in a church's stairwell, arms wrapped around her knees, holding the spoon like a treasure. Her stomach ached, but she didn't care. Her mind was full of his eyes, his laughter. She remembered someone else who used to laugh like that, a woman with soft hair and kind hands, Olivia. She didn't remember the name, but she remembered the feeling. She closed her eyes and saw a room full of books, a voice reading stories and a lullaby she could almost hum. Almost. The next morning, she woke up to chaos. Police cars swarmed the area near Jensen's. Reporters held up printed photos, stills from the video. People pointed at her usual spots. One woman even described her clothes. Maya bolted. She ran through alleyways, slipped through fences, and didn't stop until her lungs burned. She didn't understand what had happened. Why now? Why did everyone care about a moment that felt so small, so private? She didn't want the attention. She just wanted the boy to smile again. From a rooftop 4 blocks away, she watched the world try to find her. She saw the news vans. She saw the officers, but she stayed hidden. No one would catch her. No one ever did. Not since the orphanage. Not since Olivia. She would stay invisible for now. The morning before the video went viral, Richard Monroe had noticed something that now screamed at him in retrospect. At the time, it felt like background noise, one of those forgettable daily quirks in a world full of obligations. But now, the memory burned like a flare. It was the way the nanny, Sandra, had spoken to him that morning. Her voice was tighter, clipped. She didn't make eye contact. She'd arrived late by 7 minutes, which was highly unusual for someone who prided herself on punctuality. When he asked if everything was all right, she simply nodded and muttered, "Just some family stuff." That had been it. No details, no explanation. He had let it go, but now he couldn't forgive himself for that silence. Sandra had been with Nathan since his first month. She was trained, vetted, and highly paid. Richard had never had reason to question her, but looking back, there had been other things, small moments. The extra phone calls in the last week, the way she lingered in the hallway after shifts, scrolling through her phone with her back turned. He remembered once seeing her flinch when Nathan dropped a toy, as if startled. At the time, he thought she was just tired. He was. But now he wondered what else he had missed. What other signals he had ignored while hiding behind emails and meetings. After the video broke, Sandra disappeared. No warning, no resignation. Her phone number went to voicemail on the first day. By the second, it was disconnected. Her apartment was empty. Richard sent someone from his personal staff to check, but the place had been cleared out, not just vacated, erased. Even her social media profiles were gone. It didn't make sense. No one deletes everything unless they're running. And if she was running, that meant guilt. That meant she knew something, and she had left his son vulnerable. Richard called Detective Rourke again. "She's gone," he said. Sandra vanished. Emily wasn't surprised. She'd already started a trace. Sandra's last credit card transaction had been at a convenience store 2 towns over. Nothing since. "That's not a nanny running," Emily said. "That's someone scared of what they know, or who they know." Richard didn't like the implications. "You think someone else is involved?" Emily hesitated. "I think you don't pay someone that much money for that many years without someone noticing her. If she's scared, it's not of you." Back at home, Richard began to dig through Sandra's HR files. References, emergency contacts, old application forms. One stuck out. A former employer listed as private family, no contact preferred. That was odd. He scanned the name of the child listed, Maya, the same name from Olivia's notes. His stomach turned. Was this the same girl? Could Sandra have been connected to her all along? Was this why she vanished? Because she'd been hiding something from the start? He returned to Olivia's old journals, reading each entry with new eyes. There were mentions of Sandra. Long before she officially worked for them, Olivia had met her during a volunteer drive. She'd written, "Sandra has a soft spot for Maya. She sneaks her extra fruit. I think they're close. I'm glad." That was 2 months before Olivia died. Richard closed the journal, his hands trembling. He realized, now that Sandra wasn't just a nanny, she had been part of Olivia's quiet plan to protect Maya, maybe even after Olivia's death. And now, Maya had found Nathan. This wasn't random. This was a thread that had never been severed. Richard felt a mix of betrayal and regret. Sandra had never told him. She'd worked under his roof, cared for his son, and all the while she'd carried a secret connected to the girl, now vanishing into the city's cracks. He wondered how many times they had passed each other, Maya and him, without knowing. How many days she might have watched from the shadows while he walked through life blind to her presence. That kind of guilt didn't come from negligence. It came from denial. Emily sent over footage from a neighboring building's security cam. It was time-stamped just before the original viral video. In it, Sandra is seen speaking to someone just out of frame. Her posture is rigid. She hands over something, a bag maybe. Then she walks away, leaving Nathan in the chair. The figure never steps fully into view, but from the way Sandra turns back, once, twice, it's clear there was hesitation, fear, regret. Richard watched it 5 times. On the 6th, he noticed the faintest glimpse of yellow in the lower corner. A shirt, a child's. Maya had been nearby the whole time, maybe even closer than anyone realized. Maybe Sandra hadn't abandoned Nathan out of neglect, but out of trust. Maybe in some twisted way, she had believed Maya would take care of him. And maybe she had. But that didn't change the fact that Richard's son had been alone, vulnerable, that his trust had been misplaced for too long. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table long after the house had gone dark, reading Olivia's letters again. In one dated near the end, of her illness, she'd written, "Maya's heart is stronger than most grown men. I wish the world would give her a chance. If I don't make it, I hope someone will." Richard folded the page slowly. The weight of that wish pressed against his chest. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was his story now. And he had no choice but to follow it. The morning after watching Sandra vanish from the security footage, Richard Monroe sat behind his mahogany desk, staring blankly at the screen of his phone. He had scrolled through the same list of private investigators 3 times already. Names with reputations, people who operated off the record. Discreet, expensive. He wasn't worried about money. What worried him was wasting time. He selected a name near the top, Trevor Hensley, ex-cop, retired early under questionable circumstances, now a fixer for hire. Richard didn't care about his past. All he needed was someone who could find a ghost in a city full of shadows. Trevor arrived at Monroe Tower less than 2 hours later. He looked exactly as Richard expected. Unshaven, overconfident, dressed in a jacket that had seen too many winters. He sat without waiting to be invited, legs spread wide, fingers tapping on a worn leather notebook. "So," he said, "you lost a kid or found one?" Richard hated him immediately. "I need information on a girl named Maya, possibly homeless, possibly connected to a woman named Sandra who used to work for me." Trevor just nodded. "You got a photo?" Richard hesitated. "Only a video." Trevor leaned forward. "Then show me the damn video." For the next 15 minutes, they reviewed the footage. Trevor asked questions, some smart, others vague. He took notes, but never wrote full names. That bothered Richard. Still, he handed over everything. Sandra's employee records, the orphanage name, Olivia's notes. Trevor looked at the files like they were junk mail. "Give me 48 hours, he said, standing up. "If she's in this city, I'll find her." Richard didn't shake his hand. He just nodded and watched the man walk out, already regretting the decision. But it was too late. He needed someone. On the ground, Emily Rourke was digging through bureaucratic mud. Trevor might get results faster, but 48 hours turned into 72. Trevor didn't call, didn't show. When Richard finally reached him, he got a short text. "Working on it. Big lead. Stay put." Richard's instincts screamed. He didn't like silence, not when so much was at stake. He demanded an update. Trevor sent a photo, blurry, grainy, and clearly taken from a distance. A girl in a yellow shirt near a soup line. Could be Maya, or not. Richard wasn't convinced. "Where is this?" he texted. No response. Hours passed, then days. Impatient, Richard began digging himself. He revisited Olivia's records, focusing on connections she had kept private. He found email exchanges between her and an old caretaker named Lydia, someone Richard had never met. The emails revealed something shocking. Olivia had planned to adopt Maya. In secret, she hadn't told Richard. She feared he would say no, that he'd view it as too much, too soon, especially with Nathan's condition. In one message, Olivia wrote, "If anything happens to me, promise me you'll help her find a safe place." Lydia had replied, "Of course." But she's special. Don't wait too long. Richard printed the emails, stunned. He had denied Olivia's wish while she was alive, and now it was haunting him. Worse, it seemed Maya had been tossed from one failing system to another until she disappeared completely. He called Emily. She didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Forget protocol. I need every document from that orphanage, especially Lydia's file." That same night, Richard drove to the address listed under Lydia's name in the old records, a crumbling duplex near the edge of the city. No lights on, no answer at the door, but someone across the street was watching. A man in a hoodie, leaning against a lamppost, flicked a cigarette and crossed the street casually. "You looking for Lydia?" he asked, voice low, eyes hidden. Richard didn't answer. The man grinned. "She don't live here anymore, hasn't for years. But if you're looking for a kid, maybe I know something." Richard stepped back. The man reached into his jacket and Richard froze, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a crumpled photo. Maya, younger, standing in front of a mural. "You want this info?" the man said. "You pay like the last guy." Richard took the photo, confused. "What? Last guy?" The man smiled wider. "Private dude, looked like he smelled something rotten. Gave me 500 for less than this." Trevor. He'd already been here, already asked questions, and clearly he wasn't sharing everything. Richard walked away, heart pounding. Back at the tower, he tried calling Trevor again. No answer. He checked his bank transfers. Trevor had already cashed the full payment. Richard paced his office, furious. He'd hired the wrong man. Again. Just like with Sandra, he'd trusted someone who didn't deserve it. And Maya, if she was even still out there, was slipping further away. The next morning, Richard visited a shelter Olivia had donated 2 years ago. He brought Maya's photo, the one from the video, and asked to speak with someone who worked during meal distributions. A cook recognized her immediately. "Quiet kid," he said. "Polite. Never spoke unless asked. Always shared her food with the smaller ones. Haven't seen her in a week, though." That narrowed it down. Maya had been here. Recently. Close. Richard felt the urgency rising. He couldn't afford another false lead. Not another wrong turn. Back at home, Nathan stirred in his sleep. Richard sat. Beside him, holding the crumpled photo the man on the street had given him. Maya's face stared up at him. Even as a child, she had eyes that didn't flinch, eyes that carried too much. He thought about Olivia again, how she had always seen the people others overlooked, how she had known Maya was different, special. He wondered if he had spent his whole life avoiding the very thing she had begged him to face. Maybe it wasn't Maya who was lost. Maybe it was him. And somewhere, in the broken spaces between alleyways and forgotten sidewalks, Maya sat with her back against a brick wall, hugging. Her knees, she hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her stomach growled, but in her pocket was something she hadn't let go of. A drawing. One Nathan had dropped the day she fed him. It was of a house, a family, and a little girl in yellow. She traced the lines with her finger. She didn't know why she kept it. Only that it reminded her of something she never had, but still hoped for. Richard sat alone in Olivia's old study, the door locked behind him. The room had been untouched since her funeral. Dust gathered on the windowsill, and the curtains remained half-drawn, filtering sunlight in heavy golden stripes across the floor. Her scent was long gone, replaced by the stillness of a room no one dared disturb. But now Richard moved through it with purpose. Every drawer, every file cabinet, every envelope might carry something, some clue to this girl, Maya, and how deep Olivia's involvement had gone. It felt invasive, but it was necessary. He was chasing ghosts now, and this room was the only place they might still speak. He started with the bottom drawers, boxes of donation receipts, grant approvals, letters from families Olivia had helped. Most of it was administrative, neatly categorized. She had always been meticulous. But behind the old printer stand, inside a slim filing cabinet Richard never recalled seeing before, he found a locked drawer. No label, no handle, just a small brass keyhole barely visible beneath a layer of dust. He paused, pulse quickening. It took him 10 minutes to find the key, a small one on a ring of decorative spares Olivia had once kept. In a ceramic bowl near her bookshelf, he slid it in, turned. Inside was a single manila folder, no label, no tabs, just the faint imprint of a name handwritten in pencil across the top. Maya. Richard pulled it out carefully, sat down at the desk, and opened it. Inside were 5 photographs. The first was a baby, dark skin, curly hair, big eyes, Olivia holding her in a white sundress, both smiling. The second, slightly older, Maya playing with blocks, wearing the same necklace Richard had seen in the video. The third photo made his heart skip. Maya, maybe 4 years old, standing in a room. You full of bookshelves, Olivia's personal library, so she had brought her home, even if only briefly. The rest of the folder was filled with notes. Olivia's handwriting, personal, emotional. She knows the smell of lavender. She hums herself to sleep. She hates the dark. One page stood out, dated just weeks before Olivia's health collapsed. I'm starting the paperwork, quietly. No lawyers yet. I want to be sure first. Richard will worry, but I see something in her. She doesn't ask for anything, but when Nathan cries, she walks over and tries to cover him with a blanket. She calls him baby. Richard's breath caught, so they had met. Long before the video, long before any of this chaos, she had known his son. Further down in the notes there was a section labeled backup plan. Olivia had written, if I don't make it, Lydia promised to keep her safe until she can return here, but it has to be quiet. No records, no noise. The system doesn't protect girls like her. Beneath that was a phone number and a name, Lydia Shaw. Richard remembered the name from the old emails, but now he had something tangible. He pulled out his phone and dialed. No answer. He left a message, voice flat. My name is Richard Monroe. I need to talk to you about Maya. Please call me back. He sat in silence after the call, rereading every word Olivia had written. There were signs over and over that she had tried to bring Maya into their world, but Richard had been blind to it. Busy, distracted, focused on funding Nathan's treatments, planning Olivia's experimental care, managing the foundation. He hadn't seen what was right in front of him. Now he was seeing it all too late. Maya had been part of Olivia's life, part of their family, if only for a brief moment. And then, like so many forgotten children, she had vanished into the cracks. Later that afternoon, his assistant came in with a lead. We tracked down a digital archive from the orphanage. Someone leaked it years ago. It's a mess, but there's something in there. Richard skimmed through the files. Among dozens of corrupted images and redacted names, one entry stood out. Maya, intake age 2, no known relatives, found near public park, severe separation anxiety, placed in class B until further notice. That was all. No adoption record, no foster parent follow-up, nothing. As if she had been entered and then erased. Richard clenched his jaw. He knew how the system worked, funding dictated by numbers, time spent per case, overworked caseworkers, endless bureaucracy. But this wasn't just oversight. This felt deliberate. Someone had made sure Maya disappeared. Someone who didn't want her found. And maybe Sandra had helped. Or maybe she had tried to protect her. Either way, the connection was deeper than he'd realized. Olivia hadn't been working alone. There had been a network, a quiet one, of people trying to shield a child no one else wanted. That evening, Emily Rourke finally returned his call. Her voice was tired. I've been looking into Lydia. She changed her name 3 years ago, lives under the radar, has ties to an underground shelter network. I think she's still protecting kids. Richard didn't hesitate. Can you get me to her? Emily paused. Maybe, but you need to be careful. These people don't trust outsiders, especially not billionaires with bodyguards. Richard understood. He had spent his life controlling rooms. Now he needed to be allowed in one. As the sun set, Richard sat in Nathan's room again, folder in hand. Nathan reached for the edges, curious. Richard showed him the photo of Maya, holding a teddy bear. You knew her, he said softly. Long before I did. Nathan didn't answer, of course, but his little hand slapped the picture twice, then went still. That was enough. Richard folded the folder closed and made a silent promise. He wouldn't stop. Not now. Not when he finally knew. Her name, and miles away, beneath an overpass buzzing with traffic noise, Maya sat with her back against a concrete pillar. The drawing Nathan had given her was creased and worn now. She folded it carefully, slid it into her shoe, and looked out at the empty night. Somewhere out there, someone had remembered her name. She didn't know why, but her heart beat faster. The alleyways were colder than Richard expected. He had lived in the same city his entire life, owned real estate on half its blocks, funded shelters and community centers in its poorest neighborhoods. But he had never truly walked these streets, not like this. Not after dark, not in silence. Detective Rourke led the way, head down, coat collar pulled up. She said very little. You need to see it for yourself, she told him. You need to see where kids like Maya go when they're not found. That was hours ago. Now deep into a part of the city untouched by developers and completely invisible to tourists, Richard saw the truth. Dozens of children living in shadow. They didn't live in one place. They moved, hiding under bridges, behind construction sites, in forgotten basements of condemned buildings. They lived in clusters, unofficial networks. Word of mouth kept them alive. One kid knew where to find bread. Another knew which rooftop gave the best view of oncoming danger. It wasn't community, it was survival. Emily explained that most of them had slipped through the cracks years ago, aged out of foster care, escaped abuse, ran from shelters where they were more likely to be. Hurt than helped. No paperwork, no files. No one looking for them, just names shouted in the dark that no one ever answered to. One group led them to an underground parking garage. The lights were shattered. The air smelled of urine and rust. There, tucked behind a row of abandoned sedans, a handful of kids huddled under torn blankets. One girl, maybe 12, watched Richard with sharp eyes. She didn't flinch. You the one asking about Maya? She said before anyone else spoke. Richard stepped forward slowly. Yes, he said. I'm trying to find her. I think she might know my son. The girl nodded once, then turned her back. She don't stay long. She moves. You should too. Then she vanished behind the cars. They followed a path through an alley behind a shuttered motel. There, near a pile of broken furniture and soggy cardboard, someone had drawn symbols on the wall. Circles, stars, a crown, Emily pointed. Kids mark safe spots, places where no one hurts them. Maya's been here. Richard stared at the symbols. They meant nothing to him. But to Maya, they meant safety, direction. He felt the weight of that. How a child had to create her own map just to survive. It made him sick. He reached out and traced one of the stars with his finger. Beneath it, written in chalk, M is for me. An older boy approached, maybe 14, tall and wiry with a busted lip and a twitch in his hand. She talked about you, he said to Richard. Said your kid had eyes like glass. Said he laughed, even though he was stuck in a chair. Richard swallowed hard. Do you know where she is? The boy shook his head. She don't tell no one where she goes, but she comes back. Always. She brings food sometimes, medicine, shares it. She's small, but she don't act small. She's different. Emily stepped in closer. How do you know her name is Maya? The boy shrugged. She said she picked it, said it used to be hers a long time ago. Then the boy reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, an inhaler. Red plastic, scuffed and worn. The Monroe Foundation's logo was barely visible on the E side. Richard's eyes widened. Where did you get that? The boy hesitated, then said, she gave it to me. Said your people dropped them at shelters but didn't stay long enough to see who needed them. Richard took the inhaler with shaking hands. It was one of his own programs. Years ago he had funded a campaign to donate medical supplies to low-income families. But clearly, something had gone wrong. His name was on it, but no one had followed through. He sat on the broken curb and stared at the plastic in his hand. It was supposed to save lives. Instead, it had ended up in a pocket of a child who lived beneath the city. Richard felt something collapse in his chest. Not guilt, not quite. Shame, the kind that doesn't let you look in a mirror afterward. He thought of Olivia. She would have walked these streets without hesitation. She would have brought Maya home years ago, while Richard held meetings about quarterly losses. He closed his eyes. "Tell her," he said softly, "if she comes back, tell her I need to speak with her. Please." The boy nodded, then walked away, disappearing like fog. Emily sat beside Richard, her tone quiet. "This city's not broken. It was built this way. These kids are invisible because someone decided they should be." Richard didn't answer. He just stared into the dark. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do next. Money wouldn't fix this. Lawyers wouldn't fix this. Only one person could, Maya, and he had no idea how to reach her. As they turned to leave, Richard noticed something painted on the wall near the edge of the alley. A small flower, yellow. Next to it, a shape, childlike, uneven, but unmistakable. A wheelchair. And under that, in smeared blue chalk, "I remember." Richard reached out, touched the edge of the drawing, and something inside him shifted. Maya had been here. She had left this behind, not just as a message, but maybe as a map. And not far away, under a broken streetlight near the industrial tracks, Maya sat in silence, watching the stars flicker between clouds. She had seen them, Richard, the woman with the badge, the boy who took the inhaler. She hadn't run, not yet. Part of her wanted to. The other part, the one that still remembered Olivia's voice, told her to wait. Just one more night. The tip came at 3:12 a.m. through a blocked number on Emily Rourke's encrypted phone. A voice disguised with static said only one thing. "She's in Maplewood, apartment 12, under the name Anita Lopez." Then silence. Emily didn't hesitate. She called Richard immediately, waking him from a restless sleep. "It's Sandra," she said. "I think she wants to be found." Richard was already out of bed, throwing on clothes before she finished speaking. 30 minutes later, they pulled up to a crumbling brick complex in a forgotten corner of the city, far from Monroe Tower, far from everything that once made Sandra's life seem respectable. The hallway stank of mildew and cigarettes. Apartment 12 had no name on the door. Emily knocked once, firmly. Silence. Then footsteps. A slow click of locks being turned. When the door opened, Sandra stood behind it, thinner than Richard remembered. Her hair longer, eyes shadowed and sharp. She didn't speak. She just moved aside and let them in. The apartment was small, barely furnished. A mattress on the floor, a few dishes stacked by the sink, and a single photo on the wall. Olivia, holding Nathan as a newborn. Sandra caught Richard staring at it. "She gave me that before she died," she said, voice dry. "Said to keep it close." They sat across from each other. No table between them, just air heavy with things unspoken. Richard didn't waste time. "Why did you leave Nathan alone?" Sandra looked at the floor. "I didn't," she said. "I left him with someone I trusted." Her voice didn't tremble, but her hands did. Richard leaned forward. "You left him on a sidewalk with a homeless child. That's not trust. That's abandonment." Sandra snapped her eyes up. "That girl is not just anyone. She's not some random child, Richard. She's Maya. Olivia's Maya." The words hit like a hammer. Sandra explained everything. How Olivia had confided in her near the end. How she had asked Sandra to watch over Maya if anything ever happened. Olivia had worried that Richard, overwhelmed by Nathan's condition and business obligations, would never allow another child into their lives. So Sandra agreed, quietly. She had visited the orphanage on Olivia's behalf, brought Maya food and books, kept her company when staff were too overworked, but after Olivia died, the system changed. The orphanage shut down, and Maya disappeared. Sandra searched for her, even used Monroe Foundation resources discreetly, but found nothing until the day she saw Maya on the street near the building. "She recognized me first," Sandra said, her voice cracking for the first time. She walked right up to me like no time had passed. I was going to call you, I swear. But then she saw Nathan, and something happened. She knew him, I don't know how. She just cared for him. Richard's throat tightened. So you left them alone? Together? On purpose? Sandra nodded slowly. I thought it would be brief. I watched from a distance. I didn't expect anyone to. Film it. I didn't think it would become this. She gestured vaguely, as if the storm outside her walls had a shape. Emily interrupted. Why run? Why not just explain? Sandra looked away. Because I broke the law. I falsified records, hid a child, used foundation assets off the books. They'd arrest me, Richard, and worse, they'd take her again, and she wouldn't survive that. You saw how she lives now. That's still better than what they did to her inside those places. Richard clenched his jaw. Every instinct told him to be furious, but beneath the fury, there was understanding. Olivia had trusted Sandra, and Sandra had tried, maybe not the right way, but in the only way she knew how. He looked at Emily, who gave him a slight nod. You won't go to the police, Richard said to Sandra. Not yet, but you're going to help me find her. And when we do it my way this time. Legally. Permanently. Sandra looked up, eyes wet now. You really think she'd come back to you? After everything? Richard stood slowly. She came back once already. She fed my son. She stayed close. That means something. He turned to leave. I'm going to make sure it means more than a memory. Back in the car, Emily pulled out her notes. She mentioned something about a mural Maya loved near the old train station. Kids like her leave signs. If she's still in the city, that might be where she goes when she's scared. Richard didn't hesitate. Take me there. They drove in silence. The city passed by. In fast-moving shadows. Richard's mind was racing. All this time, Maya had been part of their lives, a silent echo of Olivia's hope, a promise half kept. And now, finally, he had the chance to make it right. They arrived just after sunrise. The mural was faded, chipped in places, but still recognizable. Bright flowers, animals, a river painted to look like it flowed through the bricks. And there, near the base, drawn in fresh chalk, a yellow flower, a wheelchair, and two stick figures holding hands, one with curls, one with a locket. Richard crouched down slowly. She was here, he whispered. Maybe still is. And behind them, in the shadow of a nearby stairwell, Maya watched with cautious eyes. She didn't move, not yet, but she didn't run either. The storm came suddenly, sweeping over the city like a curtain being drawn too fast. Rain hammered rooftops, poured into alleyways, and turned every sidewalk into a mirror of blurred headlights and broken reflections. Richard didn't wait. He left the mural behind, left Emily and Sandra coordinating. Nearby shelters and safe zones, he moved on instinct, like something in his bones knew where to go next. He drove alone, windows fogging up, the wipers useless against the downpour. His destination wasn't logical, it wasn't even marked, but he remembered Olivia mentioning it once. A small, half-finished pedestrian bridge near the train yards, a place she said made her feel like the city paused. He parked in a puddle that came halfway up his shoes and stepped out into the night. The bridge was barely lit, just one flickering lamp above, casting long, stuttering shadows. And there she was, Maya, curled beneath the concrete arch, soaked through, holding something tight against her chest. Richard slowed his approach. She didn't run, didn't move, just stared. Her eyes, wide and sharp, tracked his every step. He didn't say her name. He didn't say anything. He just knelt a few feet away and sat on the wet ground, letting the cold seep into his bones. Minutes passed in silence. The rain kept falling. Maya didn't look away. Her fingers clutched a small blue blanket. Nathan's. She must have taken it days ago, during one of the unnoticed moments. Richard didn't care. In fact, it gave him hope. She hadn't forgotten. She hadn't let go. He watched her closely. Her shoulders were stiff, chin slightly raised, like a wild animal not sure whether to strike or flee. He misses you. Richard said quietly, finally. "He's not the same since you disappeared." Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. "You don't know me," she said, voice hoarse but steady. "You're right," he answered. "I didn't. I should have. Olivia tried to tell me. I wasn't listening, but I am now." Maya blinked once, then again, slowly. The rain dripped down her cheeks, disguising whatever else might have been falling. She looked down at the blanket in her hands. "He was the only one who smiled when I was near," she whispered. "Even before I spoke, he just looked at me like I mattered." Her words struck him harder than he expected. Richard leaned forward slightly. "You do. You always did. We just didn't make you feel that way." Maya looked up, eyes finally softening, but there was still a shield between them. Years of pain, abandonment, and silence that no single moment could erase. "Why now?" she asked. "Why care now that I showed up on a video?" Richard exhaled deeply. "Because I saw something in you I can't ignore anymore. I saw Olivia. I saw my son. I saw what we lost and what we might still have if we try." She shook her head, but not in rejection, more like she didn't believe someone could speak like that and mean it. "People always say that," she muttered. "Then they forget." Richard stood slowly and took one step closer, then knelt again, rain soaking through his expensive coat. "I won't forget, not this time. You knew my wife. You protected my son. That makes you part of this family, whether I knew it or not." Maya's lip trembled for the first time. She looked down, trying to hide it, but her hands gripped the blanket tighter. He didn't reach for her. He didn't push. He just sat, waited, let the moment do the talking. Then quietly, Maya asked, "Does he still laugh?" Richard nodded. "Not as much, but I think he will, if you come back." She wiped her face with the sleeve of her soaked hoodie and stood up, slowly, cautiously. "I don't have anything," she said. "No stuff, no clothes, just this." She held up the blanket. Richard didn't hesitate. "Then we start with that. That's more than enough." She hesitated, looked around. Her world, the overpasses, the cracks in the pavement, the symbols drawn in chalk, all of it had kept her safe for years. Walking away from it was like peeling off armor. But then she stepped toward him. Just one step, then another. He didn't rush her, didn't touch her, just walked beside her as she followed him to the car. When they reached it, she paused. At the door. "I'm not used to warm places," she said. "It feels wrong." Richard gave her a half smile. "We'll keep the windows cracked." She nodded and got in. They drove in silence again, but it wasn't the same silence. This one was filled with possibility. When they pulled up to Monroe Tower, Richard turned off the engine but didn't move. "No pressure. We take this 1 hour at a time. You don't owe me anything. Just stay, just see." She looked at the building, at the lights inside, the glow behind the nursery window. "He's awake?" she asked. Richard checked his watch. "Probably. He doesn't sleep when it rains." Maya looked down at the blanket again. "Me neither." She stepped out of the car, walked slowly toward the door. Inside, Nathan sat in his chair, fussing softly, kicking his legs. When Maya entered, he went still. Then he smiled. Not a big smile, not a loud one, just a quiet curl of the lips. She walked over and dropped to her knees beside him. "Hey, baby," she whispered. "I told you I'd come back." Richard stood behind them, watching, not saying a word. His chest ached in a way it hadn't in years. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was healing. Maybe both. All he knew was that this was the moment everything changed, and nothing else would ever be the same. 3 months later, everything looked the same from the outside. Monroe Tower still cast its long, polished shadow across the skyline. Executives still arrived in town cars. The foundation still hosted galas and printed reports full of metrics. But inside, the pulse had changed. The walls now held new photos, not staged charity snapshots, but moments captured in between. Maya sitting beside Nathan on the nursery floor, both of them laughing over spilled cereal. Maya reading out loud while Nathan reached for the pages. Richard kneeling beside them, not posing, just watching. No press, no hashtags, just truth. Maya didn't adjust overnight. Her first week in the Monroe home was silent. She barely spoke at dinner. She refused to sleep in a bed, choosing instead to lay curled beside Nathan's crib with the blanket still clutched tight. She didn't look people in the eye, especially not staff. She flinched at sudden sounds and kept a pair of worn shoes by the door at all times. But no one asked her to change. Richard told the staff clearly, "We meet her where she is, not where we wish she'd be." And so they did. Slowly, Maya began to unfurl. She started school with private tutors, always with Nathan nearby. Her test results were inconsistent. She excelled in reading, but struggled with math. When asked why, she shrugged and said, "Numbers don't talk back." But her behavior changed. She started humming again. She stopped hiding food. And one night, when thunder shook the windows, she didn't crawl under the table. She crawled into Richard's arms. No words, just trembling, trust, and a single whispered name, Olivia. He held her tighter than he'd held anything in his life. Richard stepped down from the board of the Monroe Foundation 2 weeks later. The media called it a surprise. Investors speculated health issues, but the truth was simpler. He was done talking about change. He was ready to live it. He sold off half his commercial holdings and redirected the funds to a new project. The Olivia Center, a shelter and educational center for unhoused children and teens. Maya chose the name. She also drew the logo, a flower with a wheelchair hidden in its stem. When he showed it to the designers, Richard said, "Don't change a thing." The grand opening was quiet. No press, no ribbon cutting. Just Richard, Maya, Nathan, Emily, and a few dozen kids who had once lived in silence. Maya stood in front of them and for the first time spoke publicly. "This place is for kids like me," she said. "Not because we need saving, but because we deserve to be seen." Her voice didn't shake. Nathan sat in his chair beside her, reaching for her hand. She took it. No. Hesitation. At home, things felt simpler. Richard learned to make pancakes badly and laugh about it. He learned how to braid Maya's hair, how to tell when she was lying, and how to let her lie sometimes if it made her feel safe. Nathan started vocalizing more, smiling more. Every night, Maya read to him, sometimes made-up stories, sometimes old letters from Olivia's journals. Richard listened through the door, heart heavy but full. The pain hadn't gone, but now it had purpose. One afternoon, Maya came into his office holding 2 envelopes. "One's for school, the other's for adoption court," she said. Richard froze. "You ready?" he asked. Maya didn't smile. She just nodded. "I want this to be real, not just safe, real." That was the day she took his last name. Maya Monroe. It wasn't ceremony. It was choice, power. And Richard knew in that moment no amount of money had ever bought him. Something so priceless. Weeks later, in a candid family photo taken on the back porch, Maya sat in the sun with Nathan on her lap. She fed him spoonfuls of applesauce while Richard adjusted the shade umbrella behind them. The picture wasn't meant to be special, but it became the one they framed. Maya wasn't smiling. She rarely did for photos, but her eyes held something stronger than joy, belonging, like she finally believed she wasn't going to be sent away again. At the bottom of the frame, engraved in soft lettering, were the words Maya had chosen herself. "Sometimes family isn't found, it isn't. It finds you." And in the quiet of a life rebuilt, beneath the weight of promises finally kept, that truth became everything. Hi, I'm Erlen, the host of Whispered Helms. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment telling us what you felt, and most importantly, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to see more emotional stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and join our community. There's more coming. Stories that matter, stories that stay. Thanks for watching.